For those of you who don't know us, ScotCen is part of NatCen Social Research, which is the UK's largest independent social research institute and an educational charity. Since 1999, we've been running the Scottish Social Attitudes Survey as an annual study as a way of really carrying out a detailed exploration of what people in Scotland think and feel about a range of pressing social and political issues. SSA operates on a kind of modular design. So each year we have a core of questions that are about kind of social and demographic issues, and then a series of modules that address different topics, specific topics. And obviously, since 1999, issues of constitutional preference, national identity, political identity have been a core part of the study. It is not an opinion poll, or at least not in the sense that that term's usually used. And what distinguishes it is really, first of all, the rigor of its methods, the depth and care of its design and analysis, and its focus on understanding deep patterns and long-term trends in public opinion. It's based on a nationally representative probability sample of just under 1,500 people, and in 2013, the survey fieldwork was carried out with adults aged 18 and over interviewed in their own homes between June and October. And it had a response rate of 54%.
One of the fantastic things about the long-term existence of what is now called the National Centre for Social Research is a very long run of excellent social surveys, before 1999 associated with UK general elections. And that includes surveys done right back in the 1970s, associated with the elections in that period, and also with the referendum of 1979. One of the myths, I think, of Scottish public debate is that Scotland has become much more sympathetic to independence in a period since the 1970s, which is often claimed to have been an extremely unionist decade. It's clearly not the case. There was already quite a substantial minority, but nevertheless a minority in favour of independence at that time.
I'm very pleased that we were persuaded by you to fund work under Scottish Social Attitudes. It is the flagship social survey in Scotland, and as ever the new iteration promises us some new insights. And I guess the most important is the preoccupation of ordinary Scots with issues which have something or other to do with their personal, financial and economic situation. But also an absence of preoccupation with some of the issues repeatedly aired by the governments and campaigns on either side of the referendum debate.
There's still about a third of voters that hasn't made up their mind. And I think it's important to engage with them first, because even if you have made up your mind, maybe you change your view. But if you can't engage with them, it's very unlikely, I think, that you move much further. Some of them belong in this usual suspects category. Very little on the demographics, and that's quite important to note probably. But there are a few who are just politically disinterested. But it's a minority. We can explain the gender difference if we look at efficacy, understanding. And we find some difference between the political parties, first of all between no political party orientation at all and being having an identification with a political party, but also within, in particular within the Better Together campaigns, differences between Conservatives and Lib Dems being much more decided, and Labour identifies less so. And finally, on national identity, we have seen, obviously, that there's a little bit going on with those who have a more clear identification. Finally, and I think those probably are the more important findings from this, is that efficacy matters. There's clearly something about people's understanding of, does this matter to me and do I understand this? And there's more that can be done in this area, and there's probably room for the campaigns also to engage more effectively with those groups. And second of all, one of the key things to grab quite large groups of those undecideds is probably to present the option that they would consider their second best preference, which clearly hasn't convinced a lot of them yet. What is the next best preference to devolution max? Voting yes or no, where are the best outcomes coming from? And that might be what can, maybe one wants to say should, dominate some of the debates over the next period.
And it's about the issue of whether there's going to be some huge shock which will change the game over the next few months. There's a lot of uncertainty, it seems to me. Generally, that favours the Better Together campaign rather than the No campaign. But there is also this issue that seems to me that what economists consider to be key economic areas, such as currency, aren't really having all that much traction with the voters.
While there may be concessions in the context of those negotiations that would facilitate cross-border working, I'm not going to predict whether it would be on the currency or whether it would be on energy or anything else, but whatever the concessions that there are, they would come with constraints. In currency, for example, if there was to be a concession towards a formal currency union, it's difficult to see that happening without the Treasury wanting to have some sort of control over what was going on in Scotland, and similarly in some of the other fields as well.
So what do we discover? Well, looking at these issues of nationhood helps a little to identify a group with a distinctively strong belief in Scottish self-government, that idea that Scotland should be governing itself, that Scotland has a distinctive culture which should be reflected, but it's marginal and it can quite rapidly disappear once we introduce other things. Secondly, a lot of those debates, we've talked about the currency, we've talked about the European Union today, lots of people have accepted this is not really going anywhere. The truth is that the nuclear weapons debate is not going anywhere very much either. What does matter is what Lindsay Patterson said to us would matter, which is whether or not you think that risk should be pooled. Though arguably this is simply another embellishment on the general debate about the economic and financial consequences of independence rather than necessarily a new dimension. But that otherwise issues of welfare about just simply whether you want more or less, whether Scotland would therefore as a result be a more or less equal society, again doesn't seem to be a major issue of traction in this referendum campaign. So I hope if this morning was all bleeding obvious, that this afternoon, at least one thing that I said is perhaps something you would not necessarily have expected. Some of you may wish to disagree with, but that's our best understanding of actually where Scottish public opinion seems to be on some of these issues that are prominent in the campaign, but many of which actually don't seem to be working out there.
I think for me, all of this says, and I would say this, wouldn't I, the importance, obviously, of listening to the public, and in a modern democracy, the importance of a well-constructed, really detailed, thorough, and scientifically representative study like Scottish Social Attitudes. It's really giving lots of clues about what could work better with the public, and so I definitely would advise the Yes and No campaign to pore over the detail and really perhaps recalibrate their campaigns in the coming months. And of course, if people do want knowledge, then again, we are just in such a better place than we were 10 years ago in terms of the ability with social media, content and the website, much more attractive use of survey data and so on. It's so much more accessible to anybody who is interested. You don't have to just go through the mediators of traditional journalists, as important as they are. I speak as an ex-BBC person myself. So the What Scotland Thinks website, definitely worth looking at. Let people know about it. It's all there and you can actually interact with the detail in the Scottish Social Attitudes data as well.